right, looks like we're good to go. Welcome to the April 2019 OCAS Power BI Pilot demo. Let's jump in, and hopefully anyone who's joining us a couple of minutes later can catch up. So I'd like to start with a public service announcement. It's officially spring, which I'm very excited about. I don't know how many people here are in the GTA area or like to come into the GTA area. To me, what marks the beginning of spring is when the High Park Cherry Blossom Foundation announces their peak bloom period. That's something I do every year. So that is coming up in early May. If you're interested. If not, at least we can all be excited that things will soon be all kinds of shades of green and pink and white, and the world is very excited to be getting out of hibernation. So as always, we like to start with a bit of a recap of who we are and where we are and what we're doing here together today. We have had quite a few people join the pilot group since the last conversation that we've had, so I'll just spend a little bit of time talking about what the group is all about. So since summer of 2018, of last year, we've been going through this project here at OCAS to put together a group that will look into filling gaps in reporting and insight that's currently available from OCAS to our partner colleges, and also opening up the conversation lines about future directions of business intelligence and hearing lots of feedback firsthand from everyone who uses our services or who would like to start using our services once those gaps have been filled. So this is one of the ways that we're doing that, is we're having these demonstrations, we're building some data products in this Power BI tool, we're sharing these data products with yourselves, we're getting them into your hands so you can start looking at them, you can start playing around with them and getting a feel for what we're capable of when it comes to next level reporting and analytics. And we also want to hear from you. We want to hear from you offline, and we also want to hear from you throughout this demo. So if you're interested, if you have something to say, if you have a question or a contribution or an idea, a piece of feedback, feel free to speak up on the phone. Feel free to use the chat feature of the meeting. We do very often have people using the chat feature in Skype, which is the little talk bubble at the bottom left of your screen. So if you type in any questions or comments in there, we'll read them out to the group and we can address them. And we do want to be very honest about things that are out of scope of this project and of this conversation, and that includes any questions or change requests to data warehouse reports, or any individual project partnerships or data requests for your team or for your college. We have some processes currently in place, so please continue to use those processes. Reach out to the contacts that you have. If you're not sure where to start, you can always start at data@ocas.ca. That reaches the entire research and insight team, and we will forward it to the right person. So is there any questions at this point before we move forward to some of the content that we have for you today? All right, let's move on. So every month we meet and the agenda is very similar. We give an update on what we've been working on since the previous month. We spend most of our time on a hands-on demo where we pop into the Power BI tool and we show you exactly what we've implemented and what it looks like. We walk you through it, we take some of your feedback and immediate reactions, and we address any questions you may have around that. And we also want to make sure that you have access to this and that it's in your hands so that we can continue to collect feedback moving forward. Sometimes we pop into Hey OCAS to take a look at any ideas in there that have moved forward. We have kind of played that by ear. Sometimes there's more, some months there's more content in Hey OCAS than others. And we always open the floor at the end for any new ideas, for any thoughts or insights anyone has had that they'd like to share with the group and share with us. Make sure that we kind of have that opportunity to have a candid conversation around what's happening with the rest of the industry that might be relevant for the college system and that might be relevant for the OCAS services in the data space that we're providing to you. Any questions or thoughts here? All right, we have a very full list of changes, so let's jump into that. There are 3 reports to which we, and when I say we, I really mean Aaron. He's our key developer on this project. If you haven't met Aaron Purdy, I hope that you will at some point in the near future. He does amazing Power BI work. So the 3 changes, the 3 reports to which there are changes are the program retention report, the market share report, and the high school report. So on the program retention report, there's some very exciting new development. So there's a new feature that Power BI has released a couple of months ago called Key Influencers that looks into what factors make the biggest contribution towards kind of your independent variable, you know. And so if you've been running predictive models at all, you'll be very familiar with the concept of what are the key variables that are influencing the outcome of the situation. If you're not, don't worry, this is something that I hope will make a lot of sense to you as soon as you see it. And it allows us to visualize on the retention piece what factors influence second-term retention and second-year retention, or the one-year retention within the first year. We've loaded lots of variables in there, and we'll showcase some of those to you. You'll see that some programs, age or gender can have an influence on whether a student is retained in the program. In some programs, their starting high school average can have an influence, which is probably not a surprise, but it might be a surprise about which programs experience that and which don't. And so we'll show you all of the different ways that Power BI has surfaced that functionality and all the different ways we can visualize it. And we'll also talk through some of the limitations to the functionality and what we may or what we're not seeing. And we'll talk through some of the conversations we're having with the development team in order to see where this feature moves going forward. And we've also added some additional slicers to the program retention page, the original one that you're used to, because we have gotten some questions around looking at retention specifically within some segments. So fee category, applicant type, gender, and college catchment. So we can see whether what my retention is like for those that live locally, for those that are direct or non-direct, and for those that are funded, fully funded, or maybe international, maybe nursing. So we'll look into those as well. So that's it for the program retention report. And we do like to use the reports that we're doing as conversation starters as well. So one of the things that whoa, things got changed on me. Okay. Excellent. This is where we were. We'd like to start a conversation around if you are doing predictive modeling or if you are talking through understanding what factors influence particular independent variables you're trying to explain, how do you visualize data influencers and how do you go about understanding all of the different things that go into student retention and how do you summarize all of those and really make it consumable for yourself and your team. So just keep those questions in mind as you're seeing some of this new functionality. And if you have any thoughts around this today or at any other point, let us know. And we'd love to have that broader conversation around what are all of the things that influence retention and how do you track it within your college. So we'll go through all of these, of course, in the hands-on demo. Is there any questions right now? All right, hearing none, let's talk through some of the other reports that we have and some of the changes there. We have made some other changes to the market share report. So we'll have the opportunity to pop back in there, which is one of my favorite reports. We've added some more functionality to narrow in on the data that you're looking for specifically. For example, on the municipality view, we've added a region slicer. If instead of kind of drawing the great big box around the municipalities you're interested in, you just want to select one region. Similarly, for high schools, we've added a school board slicer, so we'll show you those. We've added city as one of the breakdowns for the high school table, and we've also added confirmations so that you can see not only the trend in enrollments, not enrollments, applications, and what your market share is for people who are interested in your programs in your college, but also people who are ultimately confirming to your programs in your college. And we've also updated some of the trend reports. So we'll show you what that looks like. And with that, the question I want you to think about when you're going through this report is this report, the market share report, has kind of exploded. As we're getting more and more questions, to add this metric and add this slicer, there's now a lot of content, and it can get a little bit confusing when you're looking at that massive amount of data. So is there a way for us to identify what are the key metrics, what are the key segments for this report, and what is really just adding noise, adding visual noise to the page that we might have the opportunity to remove. So always want to hear about what's missing and where the gaps are and what we can add, but also we want to hear about what's not relevant and what we can remove. The last report that has seen some changes is the high school profile report. So you will see this one looking a little bit different than what we've seen it last. We've added lots more data to it, and as a result, we've expanded the report to 2 pages. We've added confirmation and enrollment numbers. We've expanded the top college and top program tables to scroll past the top 5 before you could see whether your college was in the top 5, and if it wasn't, you didn't know if it was number 6 or number 24, but now you can look at that data, you can export that data. We fixed some bugs that we've noted in the past to some of the page not being reactive to filters. We've fixed some recommendations we've heard around the flight paths, looking at confirmation numbers as opposed to program choices, so we will show you what that looks like, and we've added some more visualizations around application trends. When are these high schools submitting applications by month? So we'll show you that as well. So lots and lots of content. I'll get it off the page by switching to this pretty minimal demo slide. Do we have any questions before we launch into the Power BI tool and start taking a look at these? And please keep me honest and make sure that I touch on all of the things that we've mentioned. All right, let's get right into it. Okay, Hopefully you can see my screen. I know we're good on our end, but please let me know if there's a problem and you're not seeing my screen. So this is the Power BI Pilot space app within Power BI. This is the landing page where you would land when you come in. And we'd like to start with the retention report right here. So the retention report, we'll just do a very brief review of it, relies on you selecting all of these filters, right? Knowing I'm going to start, a couple cycles back because I want to see retention, and I'm going to pick one specific college, one specific campus, and one specific program. And once I've done that, it shows me how many students started in that cohort, and then how that retention has looked for the terms of the program and also for a couple other terms. So this social services worker program at Cambrian that started in fall of 2014 started with an initial enrollment of 43 students, and we can see that we're expecting that program, based on what we know, to last 4 terms. So in the first 4 terms, in term 2, we see 21 students still there, and 7 students have transferred to other institutions. And if we look up what happened to those students, we can see that 5 of them transferred to general arts and science, and then 2 others transferred to general arts and science certificate and the pre-health sciences, and they've all they've all stayed within Cambrian, so they've all none have transferred to a different college. If some would have moved to a different college, this would show in here as well. So we can see that would be in this orange color. In this case, for Cambrian's program, there are no examples of where students have transferred to a different institution. Lots of metrics around retention rates, how many are retained in the program in term 2 and year 1. So 33% are retained in that program, 9% are transferred within the college, and 58% of students in that cohort have been lost to the system. So some exceptions, of course, apply to that rule. They may be on a co-op term. Something else might have happened that in our data make us not be able to do that record linkage, but mostly we're fairly confident that this is the number that has left the college system from that initial cohort, and then what the numbers look like in the expected final term. So some of the changes that we've made within the last month is we've added these additional breakdowns here on the right for fee category, applicant type, gender, and college catchment. So if we were interested in looking at, looks like this one was pre-selected. Yeah, so it looks like we were looking at just those from the Cambrian catchment, and those were the 43 that started there. But if we select everyone, so if we look at those within the Cambrian catchment and also outside of it, then our original enrollment would have been 57 students. And now we do see that some of them have transferred to a different institution. So here at the end of year 1, let's take a look at what those transfers look like. A little bit of spinning circles. Looks like one or maybe 2 students have moved to a different college. So it'll show us. That yeah, it looks like 2 students. And this will show us the college, the campus, and the program that the students have moved to, and also do a little bit of math around how far that college is and that campus is, and whether this may have been a move due to distance or not, right? Are they staying very local or are they going somewhere further? So I am surprised to see it spinning quite so long. Sometimes these things depend on kind of how Microsoft is doing. Usually they do come up very fast, so I'm going to move away from it just so we can look at something that's more valuable. But you have seen how these hoverovers work, so definitely something you can spend some time taking a look at. Again, if we're interested in looking at, for example, just non-directs within this program, then we can see whether that behavior is different and whether those applicants are more likely or less likely to transfer. And I'm using that language on purpose so we can take a jump to the key influencers piece next and see whether the factor really does impact it or not. And while those circles are spinning, I'm going to jump to the chat where a couple of people have some questions. So Fraser Hay, good morning, Fraser, is noting that this is a pretty amazing piece for people or colleges that don't have an in-house retention system. So I definitely appreciate that note, and absolutely that's why we're here. Is if you're doing some very complex retention reporting on your end, that's absolutely very valuable to your college. But if you're just interested in looking at the Caesar piece, then this is a piece of value we can provide, and Fraser is noting that it's better than running lots of different reports in Cognos to try to get to the same conclusion that we're getting through here. So thanks for that note, and this is really coming out of a lot of the feedback we've heard around some of the gaps in what Cognos is capable of, and we're trying to fill those gaps with this technology. And Sarah is mentioning that her options from college catchment, so here are just yes or no. And that is by design, Sarah. So this tells you whether those students came from the same catchment that the college is in or whether they came from an outside catchment. So if I'm selected Cambrian, it would be Cambrian catchment or outside of the Cambrian catchment. If this is a little bit confusing and if you'd rather see the full catchment list, we can make that change. So let us know what you think makes sense. And thank you for asking that question. Absolutely. So now that my circles have stopped spinning and we're looking at just non-direct students within this Cambrian Social Service Worker program, we can see there's 24 out of the 57, and these seem to be the ones that have transferred to different institutions. Looks like Fraser has a vote to keep the catchment filter. And it sounds like he prefers just is this inside my catchment or outside my catchment? So if you have some other thoughts, we're happy to hear them. And here, let's just spend a little bit of time talking about this hover over, where we have the non-direct students in the social service worker program. We see that after year one, 8 of the 24 are still in the program, and 1 has moved to a hairstyling program at St. Lawrence, which is pretty far. So here the distance we've calculated campus to campus is 430 kilometers. So we've got this fun little travel to new campus calculation that says you probably can't drive there every day and you probably can't drive home for the weekends. You're probably moving in order to move to go from Cambrian to St. Lawrence. And another question from Ludmila, thank you for chiming in, asking whether it's possible to add winter start programs as well. So if If you're paying really close attention, you'll see that we're only currently looking at programs that start in the fall cycle. We will definitely look into adding winter start programs. The challenge is not on the technical side, of course, it's on getting it all looking cohesively at the same time. So thank you for that. We will add that to our list and hopefully be able to demonstrate it in a future month. So with that, let's jump into the key influencers visualization. It's a new feature. It looks a little bit different than anything we've seen before. So hopefully we can make sense of it together. And I believe we have to start over on all of the selections. So I will go back and I will say this is the Cambrian program that I've started with, and my program was a social service worker program. So here's the 57 that we've seen, and in the initial cohort, 32 of them were retained to term 2 and 20 of them were retained to year 1, so the first year. And now what this will do for us is it will run what the top influencers are of that retention. So we're looking at the key influencers for the second term retention. So we want what influences the second term retention to be yes, right? We want them to be retained. And it's saying that if the student is from college catchment, no. So that means if they're coming from external, they're coming from not the Cambrian catchment, then they are 1.69 times more likely to be retained than if this was the opposite. And Fraser is chiming in and he's saying that underneath this all, he expects this to be a logistic regression approach. And you are absolutely correct. So what's running this underneath it is a logistic regression. And what it's showing you here for key influencers is anything with a p-value of under 0.05. What it's not doing is surfacing that p-value to us. And that's a part of that conversation that we're currently having with some of the developers at Microsoft. This is a very new piece that they've surfaced to us. They're not sure where they're going to take it and whether they're going to start surfacing some of the more technical stuff around the p-values and around how the model is working. We're being a very small but vocal voice for surfacing as much of the technical data as possible. So we're interested to see where this feature development goes and what decision Microsoft is going to make. But for what we know, that is the fundamental model underneath it. So thank you for asking. And then the other piece that this visualization is finding is that if the age group is between 19 to 21, then those students are 1.65 times more likely to be retained for the second term, as opposed to a younger or an older age group. So those are some things that you can take a look at. And now on the visualization, we can see from an external catchment, 75% are retained to term 2. And from the Cambrian catchment, only 44% are retained to term 2. Can I click on this? Yeah. So I'm going to pause here and ask if there's any questions on this key influencers visualization, which I think is just amazing.
Really cool.
And while Sarah is typing, I will switch to this top segments piece as well. In this case, for Cambrian Social Service Worker, Power BI has not found any top segments. So we will look at we'll look at some other programs and we'll show you what that looks like. I'll switch back to key influencers. And so Sarah's question is whether there will be anything added to differentiate what the key influencers are. I'm wondering if you could be a little bit more specific around what you mean about that. Like Fraser is saying in his next comment, this is a very surface level piece. It's kind of saying these are a couple of things that matter. These are a couple of things that if you just run a very basic logistic regression, will tell you what's coming up to influence that yes or no retention. Obviously, getting down to a deeper level and really understanding how all of the different factors play together and how to build a really good predictive model is not in full scope of this particular visualization. And what I'm hoping is that those deeper and more interesting questions is what will come to the IR teams within the college once you kind of have the little bit of initial visualization and kind of dip your toe into it. And there is also a question from Kayleen around what other influencers are considered. So I have a couple other examples to walk you through, and we'll see a couple other data points that are showing up. If you're interested in a full list of all of the different factors that we've pulled into this model, I think Erin can speak to that as well. And Sarah's wondering is whether we're looking at key influencers as a whole for retention. So I'm assuming what you mean for that is not for a specific program, but overall. So some interesting things do happen if we start removing some of these filters and we say, actually, just show me what's influencing the retention of within Cambrian College. Actually, let's pick on someone else. Let's pick on Niagara for everyone who started in the fall of 2014. So now we do see lots of other pieces that are influencing, and this will in fact take everyone into account. So the highest influencer in this case will be whether your high school average was above 80%. Right, so I think we're not surprised to see that. Students who do better in high school can do better in college, and those students are 1.18 times more likely to be retained to term 2. And we can click on this to get this little, there we go, get the little chart. If your average is 80% or above, your likelihood of being retained to term 2 is 92%. And then if your average is 69% or below, it's only 72% of students are retained to term 2. Whether the student has applied by ECD, so equal consideration date, and we see that those who've applied before the equal consideration date are a little bit more likely to be retained. Females, a little bit more likely to be retained, so that might be interesting. Students outside of the Niagara catchment in this case, so we are seeing this appearing again for Niagara just like we did for Cambrian. Whether the student is not a first generation, whether the student is under 18. So here we're getting really to that very questionable p-value, I really want to know where we're sitting point, because all of these are very similar, but Power BI engineers assure us if it's showing up here, then the p-value checks out. So we'll just have to trust them on that. And let's take a look at the segments here. So the segments are trying to group all of the different influencers together. So segment 1 is for those, here we go, is for those whose high school average is 80 and above. And we see that this segment is 11 percentage points higher than the average in terms of retention. I don't know what learn more is going to do. And then you can look deeper into the segment and you can see how it breaks down within age group, how it breaks down within gender, and all of the other factors we're considering. I'm not going to go through all of them, but lots to play with. And the second segment, this one has put together several of the metrics, the pieces that go into it. It's showing what your high school average is between 70 and 80%, so it's kind of put together. It's not under 69 and it's not over 80, and they are coming from a college, from an external college catchment. And within this segment, which they see as the second most likely segment to be retained, is 7 percentage points higher than the average retention. So Sarah is asking, is when we're looking at the college as a whole, we're getting lots of these key influencers that are identified, but when we look at a program, we were not seeing that. And so this is where the statistical significance piece comes in. When we're looking at the entire Niagara College cohort, we're looking at almost 3,500 students that started in the fall. So it's easier to draw conclusions around statistical significance if we have such large numbers. If we're looking at one specific campus and we're looking at one specific program, then those numbers become a lot smaller. And in order to know that something is statistically significant, we need to have numbers of a certain size. So sometimes we will find, like in this case of Niagara's early childhood education program, there's 92 students that started in that program, and Power BI will find no key influencers. And what that will mean is the logistic regression will run, and there will be no p-values under 0.05, and it'll say, I think anything's as good as anything else. So thank you for that question. Definitely a very good question. I bookmarked a couple of other programs that I thought we could take a look at. This is Mohawk's biotechnology program at the Fennel campus that started in the fall of 2015. It started with a cohort of 53%. So it's showing us some interesting things. It's showing us if the fee category is funded, then you are infinitely more likely to be retained. And this is probably because the segment had some international students, and those international students were not retained. They all transferred. And all the funded, and in the funded program, not all of them are retained. Only 47, only 40% are retained in this biotechnology program, but they're doing much better than the 0% of international students. Hence, we're seeing that infinity. We're also seeing that age group of 18 and younger has a pretty high retention rate for this biotechnology program. And when you're looking at the chart, it will show you also the count, the N that's going into these. So there's only 8 students who were 18 and younger, as opposed to 24 students in the next age group and the 13 students in higher age groups. But those 8 students had much higher retention for second term. And again, we're seeing students from an external catchment more likely to be retained, and applicant type is direct. So that's something we didn't see in the previous visualization that you can also see is going into these explanatory variables. And I do want to jump to this other year 1 retention piece. And here we're looking into not retention to the second term, but retention within the first year. We see that 19 out of these 23 students in the initial cohort were retained. Again, fee category is important. And here we see that applicant type direct has much higher, 3.42 times more likely to be retained after the first year compared to all other values, which is non-direct applicants. We can see that students who are first generation are more likely to be retained in this case. We've seen the 18 and younger and those who applied by equal consideration date. I'll throw up one other example. In this case, we'll take a look at Northern's Vet Tech program that started in the 2015 fall cycle with a cohort of 74 students. So within the 1 year retention, the age group of 22 to 30 seems to have a higher retention rate, and also the high school average of 80 or above. Here we go. Will show us that. So we've looked through a couple of examples, and we've seen a lot of different things that this key influencers visualization is capable of. I want to pause here and ask if there's any questions. We've spent lots of time on this, which is great because it's the bulk of the changes that we're showing today. So if there's anything that's still confusing or anything that you think would be valuable to include as a part of this, please, we want to hear from you. There was someone typing, but it looks like they've stopped typing. So I will, oh, we're back to typing. Maybe another thing I can show you. So right now we're looking at the Humber's Bachelor of Applied Arts in Criminal Justice program. Another thing you can look at is look at key influencers of who will not be retained, so who is likely to drop out in the second term by changing this selection up top. And we can see that that will give us a different picture. Sometimes it will give us the directly opposite picture, or we may find some differences. So Taylene is asking whether there's a report that shows retention rates year over year. So thank you for bringing that up. I don't believe there is one right now. Yeah, it sounds like someone is putting some fancy music. Try. Oh, someone has managed to mute themselves. Excellent. Thank you for that. Oh, we're right here. So whether there's anything that shows retention rate changes year over year or key influencer changes year over year. Both good questions, really appreciate that. I don't believe there's anything right now that's doing that, and we definitely can add it to our backlog. I'm not sure what we'll be able to do in the key influencer changes year over year, but it's definitely a very interesting question. So something that we can try right now is we can see, if I'm looking at all of Humber's 2015 cycle starts, we can see what's influencing positive retention for second term, and it will show us it's high school average, fee category, application by ECD, first generation, no, student from college, no. And what we can do is jump to a different fall cycle and see whether that changes the numbers that we're seeing. And so some of it, like high school average over 80%, will still be at the top, but now whether someone's applied by ECD or not is a little bit higher in the list. And now we're seeing whether some age groups are coming into play. So there's some ways here for you to start exploring it. I completely agree that there's no easy way to put them next to each other and compare. We'll take a look into what's possible in this space. Thank you for the question, really appreciate it. Maybe we can go back all the way to 2012 and see what mattered then. And it's, similar story. High school, previous performance predicts future performance. So play around. Sounds like a couple of you have already been in the report and have taken a look at what's possible. This is very different from anything that we've showed you before. So we'd love to hear some of your thoughts. And with the last couple of minutes we have, I do want to jump through some of the other changes that we talked about, in particular the market share report. So when we're looking at this original municipality, here we're looking at market share for George Brown. So I'm just gonna select that again to make sure our colors are working. So one of the things we've done here is we've added this region drop down where instead of going through and selecting a particular square around the GTA, for example, we can come in here and select the Toronto region, and that will just leave us with Toronto. What's a better example? York region. And York region will show us the different municipalities that are a part of it. And we can see that George Brown is doing better in the southern municipalities of York region, such as Vaughan and Markham. And in the farther ones, like Newmarket, their market share is a little bit lower. So just a faster way to drill into those. And similarly in high school, we've added the school board filter, where if you're interested, let's pick on someone else. If you're Durham and you're really interested in looking at one specific section of schools, there is no Oshawa School Board. Can take a look at maybe both the Catholic and the public school boards. And we can see how we're doing by school in that area for the 2018 cycle. So lots of different ways to slice and dice this data. Some of the other changes here included changes on the trend report. So here, let's clear some of the selections and pick on someone else. So if we take a look at Seneca, whose market share seems to be 8.2% for the 2018 app cycle, we can see how that market share has trended over the last couple of app cycles within percent of first choices market share, percent of total college choices, and also percent of confirmations. So we can see in this orange line for confirmations, Seneca's market share has moved from 6.8% of confirmations to 6.4% of confirmations for the 2019 cycle. And the 2019 cycle, of course, is incomplete. Not all the confirmations have come in, not even all the applications have come in. Maybe since we're compare apples to apples, the 2018 cycle at a bit of a higher confirmation rate for Seneca at 7.1%. And this is the 2% of college choices that you're seeing right at the top. For the blue line, we can see what the trend of that blue line has been as well. And I'll jump back to my slides just to make sure I've covered everything when it comes to changes here. Yeah, we have mentioned the new trend. And you can also take a look at these maps that we've put right next to the trend. What this lets you do is zero in on some specific trend. So if you're interested in looking how your market share has changed within the municipality of Toronto, you can click on that, and now you can see the trend has appropriately updated. Seneca's market share within Toronto is, of course, much higher than in the province overall, since that's local, and we'll see how they're doing there. And we've also, when we are looking at the municipalities, we've added confirmations as one of the values in here. We've seen that, I think, in the past, then we've seen it disappear, and now we've had some requests to bring it back, so we can see the number of confirmations on the data point, and we can always take a look at this great big table, very full of lots of different data, and we can export it and do some external things with it if that's something that's valuable. Any questions on this one before I jump to the high school report? Great. Let's move on to the very last thing we want to show you. The high school profile report, like we talked about before, is a piece that's is a report that looks a little different. It's designed to fit on a 8.5 by 11 printable page that lets you select a specific board or a specific high school, and tells you where there we go. Let's make that go away. How you're doing within that board or school. So in this particular case, we've pre-selected, let's take a look at, direct applicants was probably the right call. We're looking at direct applicants from the Kawartha Pine Ridge District School Board, which is in Peterborough. So we've got a number of schools in here. No, we've selected one. We've selected Adam Scott Collegiate and Vocational Institute. So we have some numbers around the school, the catchment that it's in. So it's in the Fleming catchment, Collège Boreal, French language catchment. We can see that within the school, the confirmation rate is 15%, which is similar to across that board and across all schools. We have some demographic breakdowns. Here we have the top, what used to be the top 5 colleges chart, which has now been expanded to fit all colleges. So if you export this and you print it out, you'll still see about 5. But if you're exploring it within the tool, you can scroll down or you can maximize the chart to take a look at where everyone from the school is going and also how many program choices, confirmations, enrollments they made within the 2018 application cycle. Okay. And similarly for programs, we can maximize this one. And also take a look at where are these students applying, and where are they enrolling. So we can see that although when it comes to program choices, some of the most popular applications have been pre-technology, practical nursing, and paramedic, there's actually very few confirmations and enrollments in those programs. It may be because those students are not getting those offers. Obviously, we can't surface that data due to the data sharing agreement limitations. It may be because those students have made different decisions and are going to more specialized or different programs. So we can see that when it comes to, actually, let's take a look at confirmations. If we sort at look at the top programs by confirmations. They will be pre-service firefighter, carpentry, general arts. Still all Fleming programs. So lots of different ways to slice and dice this data in here. And a second page where we've moved off some of these pieces. These are the flight paths that we've talked about before. Some of the feedback we've received is that the flight paths really need to represent where people are moving and not where people are applying. So they now are limited to show just confirmations. And we can see from Adam Scott to Durham, we see 2 confirmations. Even though there was 30 program choices, we can see that right here to Fanshawe, there's 3 confirmations. To the Sheridan Davis campus, there's 3 confirmations. And then the biggest number, of course, is right here to Fleming at 93 confirmations. And the other piece we've added here is how the school is doing in terms of when they are submitting their applications. So we do see lots of applications submitted in February for in advance of equal consideration date, lots of applications submitted in September, which is also fairly common for the January intake. And we also see that there's lots of direct students that are sitting down in June to go and submit their applications. Maybe they're making some new program selections after they've heard back negatively on their original program selections, and they're trying to get into the September intake. What's happening with that? That may be an interesting conversation to have with that school if you're at that recruitment relationship around what choices they're making and encouraging their students to apply. And also you can take a look at how different schools behave. So if we switch now to the Bowmanville High School, also within the Kawartha Ridge, Pine Ridge District School Board, we see a very different trend where now July is the highest application month. And maybe these are students who are waiting until they've graduated to start applying. Or maybe there's some other reason. And on the flight paths, we see this, brand new line of the students that are confirming, to attend up north. So they are going to the Confederation Thunder Bay campus. So the map of where students are going also looks very different. So lots of interesting things to explore, and with that, we're out of time, and I do not want to stand between my favorite group of people and their lunch. So I will just switch to this slide very briefly and ask if there's anyone who has any feedback on what you've seen before or anything net new you've seen out there in the world that you think might make sense for us to bring into our environment and the way that we're supporting the college system with the OCAS data services. A couple of people are typing, so we'll just settle in for that. Fraser says he never wants this webinar to end and he wants us to keep showing him new things forever. So when everyone logs off, Fraser and I will just stay for another couple hours. Jelena is also commenting from Humbird to say that she's quite happy with what she's seen today. She says, great work, Erin and the team. So definitely thank you for that note. We always love to hear encouragement and your positive thoughts, as well as your feedback on how we can make things even better. I'll switch to one more slide just to note that our official time together is coming to an end. We do have 2 more sessions booked that should be in your calendar. If they're not, let me know so I can make sure to come in and make sure you have them. So what happens from here is for us as a group to decide. So expect in the next couple of weeks a survey coming out from us around your experiences with this project, what you found useful, what you found lacking, and also what next steps you would like us to take. And we'll be using the results from that survey to make some recommendations and take some next steps. There's also a couple other notes. One from Alexandra saying that the high school report is great and is very helpful on the recruitment initiatives in the direct market. Really appreciate that. It's definitely come out of recruitment flavored conversations. So if you're having those conversations with the high school, if you're bringing this kind of data to them, and we'd love to hear about your experiences in that space and what else might be helpful. And also, Fraser is noting that it's kind of up to us as the user group to get this data into the college and get it into the hands of people in marketing and program review, and to get them onboarded and get them poking around. I really appreciate that comment. There's a couple of colleges that do have very wide participation in the pilot group and that have marketing people, and they have institutional research people, and they have program review people that are already in that system. If your college is not one of those, and if you think there's value in getting some of that broader circulation, please let us know. data@ocas.ca is the easiest way, or get in touch with me directly. We're always happy to sit down for an individual demo and get your team caught up on where how far we've come to date. And we're happy absolutely to have them join the tool and really get this data into your hands and have you start using it. Oh, so that's all the content we have. I don't even have a last slide, so we'll stop on this. Thank you very much for joining us today. We'll see you again in May.